Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yes. All right.
We
It's a
can.
pleasure. Good deal. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, and it's always good to see those who I shared a previous class with. Similar to Emily and John, in regards to some of the ideas they've discussed, my paper is exclusively focused on the Ottoman Empire and French influence within Algeria. So as I sort of tinker, with this work, I come to realize that the more I know, the more I don't know. So the initial focus was focusing on the perspectives of the Berbers within Algeria, but I've also had to sort of recontextualize the meaning of what Algeria is, not just to the former Ottoman Empire, but also the French, the Maghreb states, and the idea of Arab identity as a whole. So the premise is trying to understand what Turkification meant within Algeria, Arabization, Frenchification, Islamification, and also the sort of geographical aspects of Berberism. So one of the challenges for me when I sort of prepared this work was trying to sort of escape the idea of a sort of loyalty to the Westphalian tradition of how we look at nation states. And I think that by doing that, what I've been able to do is sort of understand the differences between why the French attempted to incorporate this idea of a total collective identity within a French metropole within Algeria, as opposed to the Ottoman Empire. So one of the interesting things that I do argue is that both the Ottomans, through this notion of the Ottoman Regency, was more of a sort of decentralized provincial system that allowed more cultural autonomy within Algeria amongst its Jewish, Arab, and also Berber populations, as compared to the French colonial system, which was more of a total system. And I did not want to sort of divorce the Ottoman influences, which roughly began in the 16th century, roughly of 1517 to 1830, and then start over with what historians say is the beginning of the French place in Algeria and North Africa in particular, roughly 1831 with the invasion of Algiers. So the challenge for me has been to sort of try to discern the differences between what the intentions of the Ottoman Regency was in Algeria as compared to the French. So one of the things I do focus on is this sort of attempt to redefine jurisprudence in Algeria, especially with the idea of Islamic orthodoxy, or fiqh. And my argument is that this idea of judicial reform was less a matter of sort of this idea of identifying with Turkish culture individually, but more so the idea was that the notion of the Ottoman Empire and its decentralized form of political control existed through this idea of the expansion of Islam. And as opposed to what this notion of Frenchification would do, is that whereas the French would attempt to essentially negate all aspects of any type of Islamic influence within Algeria, my argument is that the Regency, by trying to, in essence, spread Islam through the law, not only allowed for sort of cultural interdependence, cultural autonomy among the Arabs and Berbers, but unlike the French, this system itself resulted in less blowback in regards to the Regency, where they did allow elements of individual land ownership. They didn't redefine notions of citizenship as opposed to the French. And there was never really a bona fide attempt to expand the Turkish language. In fact, the outer regions of Algeria, more so in this mountainous regions, there was less linguistic compatibility between not just Turkish and Arabic and the dialect of the Berbers, but there was an attempt, so this lack of linguistic expansion sort of allowed the regency to sort of sustain itself. And you didn't necessarily see the same sense of antagonism toward the Ottoman Empire that you saw against the French as the mid-19th century, as they tried to impose not just the French language, but also the French culture in respect to its in respect to Algerian citizens. So the argument is that essentially that Islamification, if you will, or the spreading of Islam was an essential part of this notion of the Ottoman Empire, as opposed to the role that France would play. So I had to try to be very careful in regards to trying to sort of assume that the intent of the Ottoman Empire was similar to that of the French. So one of the ideas I did incorporate was the late Emanuel Wallerstein's arguments of core and periphery. My suggestion is that both the Ottoman Regency as well as the French metropole both do create this notion of core and periphery in regards to the central role played by Istanbul and the central role played by Paris. But the reaction to this notion of core and periphery was quite different. So whereas the Ottoman Empire was able to incorporate a sort of decentralized economic and political structure in Algeria that resulted in the maintenance of cultural autonomy amongst its population, French notions of core and periphery created negative feedback in the sense that Algerian citizens resisted what they thought was the imposition of French culture within their cultural space. So the idea of what Algeria is again, I think that certainly the legacies of both the Ottoman Empire and the French Empire are significant, but I think that again, Algeria is much more than that, given the fact that post-revolutionary Algeria is more so an Islamic nation state than it is, let's say, a Western state, or let's say a strictly Arab state. I think it's an amalgamation of not just the Ottoman Empire, but also, again, the continued role of France. It's a sort of cultural intersection, if you will, in which it cannot be completely defined as, again, something that is 100% French, 100% Arabic, or 100% Turkish. I think that it is a culmination of various external influences. So the idea is that, again, the Ottoman Regency does create similar forms of economic stratification because of the notion of empire and hegemony, as does the French Empire. But it would be irresponsible for me to assume that they are that this idea of empire had the same intentions. Also, you could argue that, again, whether or not through notions of the expansion of Islam, one could argue perhaps that the expansion of Islam was more egalitarian because it did allow for more autonomy than French notions of enlightenment that literally redefined notions of individualism within its colonies. It's not to suggest that there were not exploitative aspects of Turkification or the idea of the expansion of the Ottoman Empire in Algeria. Is not to suggest that, again, you don't have extremes of exploitation. My argument, however, is that one must qualify what exploitation means in the sense of empire based upon the overall structure of it. So I don't think that the impact of French colonialism created this sense of economic egalitarianism the same way that it was allowed under the Ottoman Empire. There was still the expectation that through the Regency, there would be political order. However, unlike the imposition of French colonialism within Algeria and North Africa in particular, the extremes of that culture and position created blowback. So in conclusion, I think that what this allows for scholars who are interested in notions of empire is sort of a two-pronged argument, right? The necessity of escaping Western scholarship and trying to figure out the symmetry between historical notions of what empires are considered to be, but also understanding that within that concept of empire, there are different policies, be they cultural, be they religious, be they linguistic, that prevent sort of these cookie cutter arguments that all revolutions are based upon similar levels of similar variables, right? You've got a notion of exploitation, which will result in a sense of relative deprivation and blowback. And I think that this assumption makes it very difficult to have diverse arguments as to what empires are, especially given the fact that not all of them follow the sort of Western tradition of what a nation state is. Instead, the history of most nation states are an amalgamation of external and internal factors that oftentimes have not necessarily been considered. So, for instance, the idea that the Algerian Revolution begins in 1954, ends in 1962, and is bookmarked within this relationship between the FLN and France, but sort of avoids hundreds of years of historical impacts of empires, be they that predate the French. And I don't think that it's responsible to necessarily assume that the Algerian Revolution only happened because of the role that France played. I think that the long history of Algeria, or North Africa in particular, created the sort of groundswell of frustrations that ultimately culminated in Algerian independence. So again, it's a challenge for me because again, I think that how Algeria represents is not just its French history, but also its Turkish history, its Arab history, and also within Algeria, certainly its Jewish history, its Christian history, as well as its Berber history, which in respect to Emily's point about this idea of a Jewish diaspora, certainly the same thing exists within Algeria, whereas the Berbers also believe in a diaspora. Also with the Arabs, the idea of the Ummah, this idea of a collective identity that transcends borders. So, as my interest in this region continues, the hope is to sort of dig deeper into what is the meaning of empire, what is the meaning of collective identity, and what is the meaning of nationalism. So, things yet to be discovered.